Good morning. I'm Teresa Coates,
And I'm Hawke Hamilton.
and today we're going to be talking all about foundation paper piecing.
Awesome.
All right. So, can you hear me? Let's get some thumbs up. Last time we had some audio issues, so we'll make sure we're not doing that again. And so as long as we're good, can somebody hear me? Are we getting anything? Hopefully.
I'm checking.
Um, so we are talking all about foundation paper piecing today, and I am really excited to finally get to do this one. I have long been a fan of foundation paper piecing, and we're thumbs up good. So I'm really excited to share this with you. This is one of those techniques that can often be a little bit intimidating for people, and it can be confusing at first. And I feel like there's so many different tutorials about it that share different things throughout. So we're going to do a little bit different today, and it's kind of more going to be a workshop all about foundation paper piecing as a whole. So we're going to talk all about different tools that you can use, different papers that you can use, and then different ways of actually constructing it together. So, and then the different types of foundation paper piecing patterns that are available. So it's a very broad kind of technique, and there really is a ton of different things that you can do with it. So today we're going to focus mostly on my Mirth pattern, which we just re-released. I'm very excited about that. And it was one of my very first patterns that we did way back, I think in 2015. I wrote the pattern, and it has just kind of sat there for a very long time. It sold well in Europe for some reason over Etsy, and so it's just kind of sat there. And a couple months ago we decided we were going to retackle it, so I've made some big updates to it. I changed the size of the block so it finishes at 27 inches square, and the instructions are much more complete. So what I realize is a lot of people, if you don't know how to foundation paper piece, the patterns don't really come with much instruction on it. And so, which is fine for somebody if you already know how to paper piece, you don't really necessarily want to read through all of it. But if you don't, I wanted to provide a pattern that would walk you through each step. So I will say that in the development of the pattern, in the redevelopment of the pattern, I brought Hawke in and I asked him to sew samples for me. And that was absolutely fantastic. So I have to give him kudos for being the star student there and kind of going through the whole thing, taking all the different steps one at a time and letting me know, like, this worked for me, this didn't, I'm confused about this. And that was great. So we really reworked the pattern. It's available now at crinkledreams.com, and we do have make with me is the discount code for this month, and well, for this month's pattern, and it's good for the rest of the week. So until Friday, that's good for 25% off. So if you want to get it, we have it available in paper and in PDF. Okay, so we're going to work on that pattern a bunch today. I am going to talk about some other patterns, but first we want to talk about some tools. Okay, so let me come on over here, and then we're going to start talking all about tools. All right, so there's a bunch of little things that we're going to want. Okay, and I want to make sure that I get all of these. I'm going to grab my paper really quick to make sure I get everything that I wanted to talk about. So one of the more important things to do or to have is add a quarter ruler. And you may have seen these. I'm going to move this stuff behind so you can see this a little better. Okay, so this is an add a quarter ruler, and there are plenty of other small rulers, and I'm going to tell you to also have a small ruler. But the add a quarter ruler is so incredibly helpful, and it's really because it has this little lip on it that I will show you how to work with it. The other part is it has this thin edge that we're going to use as well to fold along our seam line. So it's an add a quarter plus, and it is a fabulous little tool. I can't remember how much they are, but they're available at just about any quilt shop. They have them. This is the 6-inch version. They also have a 12-inch version, and I feel like they might even have a longer one. So if you're doing some of the larger foundation paper piecing products or projects, you might want to use the longer one. But this size has been great for me. Okay, we also want to have nice sharp scissors. I've got my Kais. These are my 7250s. Can you see that okay? I think the light is on the board.
It is.
And can you see okay though?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are my 7250s. I love them. They are super sharp and they're just really good for whacking off seams when you are finished sewing them. I also like to use a rotary cutter. This is from my friend Sam Hunter from Hunter's Design Studio, and she gave me her paper piecing rotary cutter. And this is a great way of just keeping track of which one it is. So this is the only blue rotary cutter I have, and it has an orange ribbon on there for Sam. That's her favorite color. And so this is my paper piecing rotary cutter. And so I know that the rotary cutter in here, this is one that I've used. It's gotten a little dull. It doesn't cut fabric quite as well as it used to. So now I use it for paper piecing because I'm going to cut all that paper, and it will dull your blade. So it's best to kind of keep a rotary cutter that's just for that. Okay. I do like that. I also want to have a stiletto because that's super important for pulling papers out, or sort of getting underneath there and making sure everything is right. I really kind of sew with that thing all the time. We also want to use polyester thread, and my needles, which I moved. Oh shoot. I have, oh, there they are. So I like to use a little bit smaller needle on this one. So these are piecing and quilting needles, and I like to use the 7511 or a 8012. And this is a quilting needle. You can use the universal. It's totally fine. Make sure that you change out your needle when you're done with your project, because sewing through paper will dull your needles a little bit faster. So you can go ahead and just use a new one each time. So other things we might need, one of my favorite tools is the Olfa. Let me turn that name so it's right. The Olfa SAC-1 blade. So this is a little blade that pops out here, and we're going to use this to take out stitches because I have a couple boo-boos to show you today, and then we're going to fix them. So I also like to use a little glue stick sometimes to get it started. I have my seam roller. So this is my Violet Craft seam roller. This is a little bit different than ones you'll find other places. Like a lot of times people want to use wallpaper ones, and they tend to be flat all the way across. The seam roller actually has a hump in it. So when you roll it, this edge doesn't actually touch your fabric. Only the center part touches your fabric and smashes down the seam. So it makes it a little bit better when you're rolling it along a seam, that you're not going to get any weird lines in it. Okay, so let me see. Oh, we got a pencil. Make sure we have that. Sharp scissors, rulers, and of course foundation paper piece, or the foundation paper. So let's talk about the paper. Okay, I'm gonna move my tools because I'm gonna need these all later. So paper is kind of the fundamental part of this. Is you're gonna use some paper. The question is, what kind of paper are you going to use? And there are a ton of different ones available. So this is always the question, is what am I supposed to use, and how does it work, and what's the difference? So I did a little experimenting this week and tried out a bunch of them, and we're going to talk about them kind of one at a time here. So the first one is just regular old printer paper. So if you've bought your pattern online, which is what I do a lot of them, just buy it online, then you can just print it out, and it will totally work. Okay, there are some pros and cons though. Pros are that it's easy to find. You've probably got it in your house. It doesn't cost very much money at all. I figured out to the ream that I just recently bought, it cost me 2 cents a sheet. So not much at all. Cons are that it's opaque, so I can't see my fabric through it very well. Even when I have the light board, it's a little bit harder to see. So that's one thing. It also the stitches stay in the seams, and I kind of have to pull out, or the paper stays in the seams, so I have to pull that out more, and it gets stuck in there. We'll see if it happens today when I'm trying to pull it out. And it needs a little bit of an extra tug, which can sometimes loosen your stitches. So while it works really well, there are some cons to it, that if you're doing a lot of it, it might not be actually the best thing to choose. It is totally doable though. And if you're doing just a small project, this is an absolutely easy way to go and super cheap. Okay. Next we have newsprint. So newsprint, I just bought basically a ream of it. It was 500 pages that I bought, and it was a nice, good, big stack of it. It's super lightweight. Okay. It's really easy to find. It's also a very low cost at only 3 cents a sheet, and it tears super easily. The con is that because it tears so easily, if you have to re-sew something, it's much more likely to just tear through. So I feel like it might be a little better if you've had some practice and you don't have to take stitches out, because the stitches will tear the paper, and that's super frustrating. It's also opaque and I can't see my fabric through it. And you don't always need to see your fabric through it. It's just one of the things that sometimes it will come in handy. This is vellum, and vellum can be found in a lot of paper stores. It can be also found in art and craft stores. It is crisper, okay? It tears very cleanly. The fabric remains visible because I can see behind it. So you can see it's really, really clear. We'll do a little bit of fussy cutting later, and I'll show you how well that works. And it can be restitched easily because it is sort of denser. But that thickness of it can cause the tension in your thread to be a little looser between the pieces. I'll see if I can find the one, or when we pull it apart in just a minute, I'll show you. There was something that I was trying to check with each one to see how the tension was affected, and this one seemed to affect it, and not like any of the other ones did. This is a slightly higher cost at 15 cents a sheet, okay? But well worth it for lots of different things. This one is a product from C&T, and it is called Perfect Piecing Foundation Sheets. It was the most expensive at 65 cents, but it was actually really super good because it has a little bit of grip. The paper or the fabric, when you put it on here, it kind of sticks to it a lot better. I didn't need to pin it or glue it. It just kind of stuck to it really well. And it can be left in if you want to use it to stabilize your project. So depending on what it is, if you were using a paper piecing pattern, say for the side of a bag or something, and you wanted to make it a little more stable, you could absolutely just leave this in there and it will wash up just fine and not come out. Okay. It also tears super duper easily, and I can still see through it. All right. So those are the papers for traditionally pieced paper piecing. Freezer paper always gets brought up, and so I wanted to give it a try. It's something that I haven't really done much of before, and I feel like this is one of those things that you either kind of love it or you don't have a ton of use for it. But it is a little bit different. So this I bought pre-cut to 8.5 by 11-inch sheets, and they were 22 cents a sheet. Okay, these are totally reusable. There's less waste because you actually, we'll go through it later, but you sew next to the line and not through the paper. So you don't have to tear out the paper every time, which is fabulous. It is really, really useful for multiple blocks. So if you're making the same block, so in this pattern, we make a bunch of the fat triangle, we make a bunch of the skinny triangle. It would work really well for this pattern because you're going to make the same block over and over again. They say that you can use this up to 20 times. And so I haven't tested that out, but that's what they say. So you can use it a bunch of times. You just iron it on. We'll talk about it a little bit later. So those are the papers that we have. There's some other ways of getting it, which this is one that I showed before, are these quilt block foundation papers from It's So Emma, which you can find through Fat Quarter Shop, and some other stores carry them as well. They have a wide variety of foundation paper piecing templates that you can buy that will show you how many you need to use to make a quilt of various sizes, and then it gives you all of the papers that you need. I did a whole tutorial on this that you can find on my YouTube channel that shows you how to make this block. I also have this one in a 4-inch block. I'm not sure where that's at, but I have a 4-inch block of this too, which is adorable. So I know they come in 4-inch, 6-inch, and I think 12-inch blocks. So depending on what your quilt shop is carrying, but I would definitely look for these. This paper worked very, very well. I was really impressed with it. It's kind of like an in-between printer paper and newsprint. So it's thinner, I feel like, than printer paper, but not quite as thin as newsprint. And it worked very well for the project. Okay, are there any questions on paper stuff?
No question.
Okay.
No questions on topic yet.
Okay, great. All right. We'll keep going. Hawke will keep track of questions and then we'll get there. So what I did is I copied out the Mirth pattern, the new Mirth pattern. I copied it out onto all of the different kinds of paper. So I have copies of, what was that?
I'm going to switch back to the bottom camera.
No, not yet. So I have a copy of all of the papers, and then I went ahead and I cut them out and then I sewed them together. So what I want to do now is kind of go through them and show you how they worked when I tore them apart. So now we'll go to the top. All right, so I tore some of them out already. Can we turn off the backlight? Is there a way to do it?
Yes.
If I just do it here?
No, it's here.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Sorry, it's a little bit hard on my eyes.
There you go.
Okay. Okay, so some of them I tore out already. So all of the skinny ones I tore out already. So what I found was that they pretty much all look exactly the same. All right, I think I have to put my reading glasses on. Hold on half a second. Yeah, I think this is the one that I did with the freezer paper, and I don't know if you can see the stitches coming out exposed there. It's the only one that I can really get the stitches to show. And it also looks ever so slightly whiter, which is kind of funny. Let's see. Yep, it's just the tiniest bit wider, and it also makes the stitches a little bigger. So I don't know how my eyes can see that truthfully, but they can. So the rest of them, I can't tell the difference. And these were all pieced on different stuff. Okay, so they come out. That's the one really nice thing. Oh, we didn't even talk about that. We'll mention it throughout. The reasons why we got to use paper piecing. This is one of them, is because you will get blocks that are exactly the same. And now I know that the 1/4 inch seam allowance is exactly the same on all of these. So when I sew these together, it will be a perfect match. That's lovely, because honestly, piecing some things like this, when you're trying to like not kill that point, it's hard. And this is a way that it gives you, so you're not going to ruin your points here, here, or here, because we've gotten them so perfect and every block is exactly the same. So that's lovely. So here we are with all of our various ones. So that one I did differently, just to see if I could do it. Okay. So we've got, so here's my printer paper. All right, and we're going to tear that one off first and see how it goes. Okay, so this is where I'm like, I have to tug a little bit, so then I have to pull. You can bend it a little extra. And I kind of pull against that. So already you can see there's paper that's still stuck in there. Okay, so that's what I was talking about with the paper gets stuck in these a little bit more. So then I have to kind of work with it a bit. This can be somewhat frustrating when you're dealing with hundreds of blocks. So that was why it's kind of a con for me, because it's a little bit more to get out. Okay, so that was paper. Here's newsprint. You can see it tears much easier. Also tears. See if I can get that to pop right there. So sometimes I have to hold a little bit of thread just so you can see it. But then it comes out. Everything came out of there just fine. Okay, here's a little place. I left this purposely so I could show you guys, is that this little spot did not come down all the way. Okay, it's going to barely catch, but it's going to catch and it'll be fine. And what I usually do is then I will mark this corner to say, like, be careful, and do a little double stitch, and I'll make sure that it catches. You could redo this, but I was just trying to see if I could put the fabric on there a different way and if it would work, and it didn't. So that was a good sample for me. All right, here is the vellum. Tears super cleanly and just pops right out. So I really do feel like a lot of this is kind of what your tolerance is for picking out papers, because my tolerance is not real high on it. I dislike it a lot. So I have often used printer paper, and I'm much more, especially after doing the woven star template with the Fat Quarter Shop stuff, then I was like, oh, this is much easier. So I'm a big fan of the different papers now. Okay, and so then the last one is the freezer paper, and I was telling you it's a little bit different here. I feel like I should have had one with the I should have one with the leave-in stabilizer. I'm not sure what happened to it. But this is the freezer paper one. The freezer paper is a little bit different, and I'm going to do a whole tutorial on this separately because it requires an iron and kind of going back and forth a bit. But the way that it's done is that you iron the fabric onto your paper, then you pull a side back and you do your stitching, and then you iron it back together. So when you're done, you just pull the template off. So there's no actually stitching through the paper. Like I said, this was the only one that caused it to be slightly, no, yeah, this one is slightly bigger, and the vellum tends to make it a little bit bigger and also a looser tension. So, but this is great. If you were going to make a bunch of these, this is a great way of doing it, because now I could just take this again, start over, iron my fabric on here and go. So it's a great way to make multiple blocks, which reminds me, come on around to the front. So one of the things that we like to do for the show that is to create like a show notes, and that is available on the website now. So if you go to crinkledreams.com, what do they search for? What do they look for?
It's going to be in featured products.
It's going to be in featured.
That's the category.
Okay.
Featured February 2025.
Okay.
And it will be there.
All
show
right.
notes.
Show notes for
Foundation
February.
paper piecing.
Yeah. So you should be able to find that there. That has show notes. So it has some of the tips that we're going to talk about, the pattern designers I'm going to talk about. And then there's a second sheet that has a block for you to try. And so what I did is I printed this out. You can then print this on whatever you'd like to try, or however many different ones you'd like to try. I have a spot here that you can put your different fabrics on here. Fabric 1, fabric 2, fabric 3. Yes.
There's a great question. I have Carol Doak's paper.
Yes.
Will that work?
Yes. Yeah. Carol Doak's paper is very good. I think it's a lot more. I couldn't find any locally, and I wasn't able to get it in time. So, but I have used that one lots of times before, and I feel like it's pretty similar to the paper weight of the It's So Emma product, but is available in 8.5 by 11 sheets. Yeah. And Carol Doak is a fabulous resource for foundation paper piecing. She's written lots of books and has online classes and all sorts of things. So she's a great resource. So you can absolutely use that paper, or print it onto this pattern onto that paper and give it a try, or any other paper that you want to try. Hawke.
One thing, where did you get your newsprint?
I got my newsprint on Amazon.
Okay. Sorry I asked. Second question. Freezer paper is not the same as parchment paper. True or false?
True. It is not the same.
Okay.
Yes. So
in what way?
Parchment paper, as far as I understand, parchment paper does not have the wax on it.
That's my understanding.
And freezer paper has the wax on it. Waxed paper is totally different too. So that is, you can often get that like in the kitchen section, but that has wax on both sides, and you don't want that.
Well, you can't print on it.
You can't print on it. And if you iron on the other side, you're just going to melt wax onto your iron. Hawke, would you look in that second drawer down on the left there? Maybe the third drawer down, and I think there's like a roll of freezer paper. No, it's in a box, like the press and seal stuff. Yeah, that's it, the freezer paper. So you can also get it like this, which the drawer is not opening all the way. It's it takes up the whole. Oops, we're pulling here, Hawke. My computer is going away. Because something's getting pulled.
There we go.
Okay, so this is the way that you can purchase it at the grocery store, and it's just like this big, huge thing. It's as long as the drawer, so he was having a hard time getting it out. This is the way that I first used it. This is fine if you want to trace all of your patterns. If you have a light board and you can trace out your patterns, you can totally use this kind of freezer paper. It's the same stuff, but honestly, the ease of having it as an 8.5 by 11 sheet that I stuck through my printer, it worked fine. I will say that it is suggested that you only use an inkjet printer for the freezer paper, because laser printers, that's what they're called, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Laser printers create heat when they print. I have a laser printer, but I only did them one sheet at a time so that it wasn't warm by the time it went through. So the printer was cold when I printed it. So it was like the first thing that I printed in the stack of them, because your printer will heat up, and then you have some trouble because now you're melting wax in your printer. So it is not recommended to print it in a laser printer. Print it in an inkjet if you have one available. Okay. Otherwise, you can trace everything out. I just can't imagine doing that for a lot of patterns. Like, yeah, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of pieces in a bunch of these. So, okay. So now you have an example of how well they tear out, how it works, how the papers all work. What was the next thing we were talking about? How to do it. Oh yeah, how to do it. All right. So now I have to find I had my little construction stuff yesterday and then it disappeared. So let's take it step by step. First, I'm going to find some fabric. What happened to my, I have a whole little pile. Do you want to just give me some of those?
Sure.
because I'm going to use that because my little pile. Oh, I found it. Oh, no, I didn't. Yes, I did. No. I'm not sure what happened to it. Okay. I found the pile for the freezer paper tutorial, but we're going to do that later and not now. So let me grab some of these. And we're just going to, I honestly don't know what happened to that. Super weird. Okay. Okay, I want to hit pause. We can't do that. Do you remember I just had this whole stack that I was showing you guys that was half cut? That was what I was going to use, and they're completely gone now.
I'm coming in.
Okay. That'd be great because I had a whole bunch of these cut out and ready to go. Yeah, super weird. All right. So I am going to use, this is the fancy foundation paper. I'm going to use that for one of them, and then I'm going to use one of these that are, well, that's the newsprint. I'm going to use that one too. So I'm going to cut that out. As soon as we're done here, I'm going to find that little pile, and it's going to be sitting like right to the side. I'll be like, oh yeah, there's that little pile I made last night. Because that's the way these things go. So I am going to use these papers and fabrics, and I can make more for that later. So now I have a skinny triangle and a fat triangle. So I really kind of want to talk about, there's a couple of different ways of doing them. And I will say that the Mirth pattern is written for brand new beginners. So what I want is for you to be able to try out paper piecing and not have to be so precise. Paper piecing is, I think it's kind of good for both people who are a little bit chaotic like I am, and a little bit more precise, probably like you are, Hawke. So if you want to be a little bit more precise, you do. If you want to be more precise about things, it definitely lets you be, but it also there's a freedom to it because you don't have to worry about seam allowances and getting things perfectly because you're just using the qualities of the paper to do that. So I'm going to start with this guy, and I'm going to show you how I piece it together in the pattern. All right, so in the pattern, what I do, and this is what you can do with other ones too, is I cut a piece. So this piece is just about the size of the whole pattern. All right, because it needs to cover this whole initial triangle that I've got. Was there a question?
So Rose has, I believe, the older version of the Mirth pattern, and her pattern sheet had 6 blocks on each page, and that made her math a little wonky. Can we talk about the difference?
So the difference is that the old one, the blocks finished at 2.5, and then the whole entire quilt finished at 21.5. And I upped it so that they're a 3-inch block, making the quilt finish at 27 inches. So that was really part of it. It makes them a little bit bigger, and it made it a more consistent size that people would.
More useful finish size, right?
I think so. And that 1/2 inch is just kind of weird, and I'm not sure why I did it originally. So I changed it. So that's what that is. Yeah. Hopefully that clarifies. If not, feel free, ask more. So when I'm looking at the patterns, and let's talk about patterns just really quick. So can you turn the light board back on again? I think this will help this part. When we have patterns, there's an order of operation. So let me see if you guys can see. Can you see those lines pretty okay? Okay. So this is for the Mirth pattern. We've got, I labeled it 1, 2, 3. Could you piece it 1, 2, 3? Yes, you could, but one needs to start. So they're always labeled. This is one that it doesn't really matter too much, but most of them are going to be labeled in a way that really does matter. So pay attention to the order of operations for this. They vary dramatically from pattern company to pattern company. So because these are super simple blocks, it's just 1, 2, 3. This one is a pattern. We'll talk more about different designers in a bit, but this is a pattern from Sam Hunter's, that I mentioned earlier, her Quilt Talk book, which has the whole alphabet and then a whole bunch of projects that you can do using the alphabet. So hers are also labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. but she has like these polka dots on where your main fabric goes, and this is where your background fabric goes. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so that's how she labels those, is so that that's easy enough to tell where main fabric is, background fabric. Then you start getting a little bit more complicated. This is from a Violet Craft pattern, and hers, this is section 29. This is 29A, B, C, and then she also puts different designs for whichever fabric you're using. So these, when you get into patterns like this that are much more of an illustration almost, it becomes much more important about what fabric goes where. I'll show you in a bit too how we fix that when you put the wrong fabric where. Then there are even more complicated ones like this one, which is the one that I am doing from Tamara Kate Design, and this is a big snake that I'm working on. This is the L section, and then it's actually the LA section, and then it goes in numbers of 1, 2, 3, 4. But then you'll see, like, sometimes you really have to keep an eye out because this one starts in the center and does the other two, just like these did. This one does not start in the center. It starts here with this biggest block. Sometimes it'll start with a tiny block, but you have to follow the number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comes back over here, 6, then this little 7, 8, 9. So following that order of operations is really important because you won't be able to get this piece on in the right place if you haven't sewn this one on first. So that's when things have to come out and get repieced. Okay, so knowing how your pattern is laid out and how complicated that piecing is really important to kind of figure this out. So on this pattern, I've got like an LA, LB, LC, and I have to put all of those together and then sew the L section together. So it builds out in chunks. This one, it's just built one at a time, and then you piece your nine patch blocks together. Okay, so there's a whole difference. You'll also see that mine, I labeled the seam allowance with the stitching line, but your stitching line here are solid. This one, it's solid lines for all of this. And then this, you have to add 1/4 inch to your pattern. So you don't cut out right at that edge. She marks here, add 1/4 inch seam allowance. And she does it very nicely on all the edges so that you can't forget, although I'm sure it happens. So making sure that you can add your seam allowance. This allows you to resize it really easily without it getting confusing. This one is the Violet Craft. She's used a dotted line on that outer line. All right, she lets her lines go out. So all the way to the point, This one is the Tamara Kate one. You can see that this one, the seam allowance is smaller. The reason for that is I shrunk this pattern by 50%. So the marked seam line right now is actually 1/8 inch, which I don't want to do. I want to cut it at the other. So I have to remember to use my ruler to mark from this line out 1/4 inch, and then I can cut it. She also goes ahead and trims off those corners for us, which makes piecing them together really simple. So you can see there's a lot of variation in patterns, and kind of understanding how they go together is the first step. Then you can start working through them. I would recommend not necessarily starting at this level until you're more comfortable with, some of the easier ones. All right, does that make sense? Are we good? Do we have any questions?
I think we're all here.
All right.
I think we're all following along.
Great, wonderful. So what I've got here is I've got my centerpiece, and I'm going to put that right on here. So I'm going to get my fabric. It makes it super easy because I can see through it, and I can make sure that the fabric is covering the whole thing. The most important parts are that when I look at where my seams are going to cross here, the fabric is past that. Okay, I can shove this over just a little so it covers it perfectly. And now my piece is exactly as wide as the block. So I know that these seams are all going to catch, and that's really important. Okay, that is one thing that having a block like this that you can see through the paper like this makes it a little bit easier. All right. So now I've got this piece. Now I need to fold this. Find my ruler again. So this is when I'm going to use the add 1/4. This is something that has taken me a little while to really enjoy the process of the folding it before you sew it, because I'm like, it's just a waste of time. I need to go sew it. But I will say that it has made it easier. Doing a couple of big ones lately, it has made a difference. So I can fold this and I can see where my fabric's going to go. So then I can take my next piece here, make sure I've only got one layer. Yep. And then I'm going to stick that on here so that it's going to catch all the way. Okay, so I haven't put it on exactly at the edge. I can, but then I have to be really careful and I don't want to. So I just cock it just a tiny bit.
And we're not caring at all about the bias.
Nope, not caring about the bias, not caring about how big this is over here. None of that yet. Okay, we're just getting started. So this, I will say, is the most wasteful version. Also, it is all little, it's all not necessarily wasteful, but you're going to have waste fabric. So what we're going to do is we need to make sure that the fabric that is going to fold around is big enough. So this is a tip that I learned along the way, is to fold this back. And especially if I do this on a light board, I could see that this fabric back here is covering this same area. Okay. It probably doesn't make a ton of sense right now why that's important, but it is. So we need this. This is piece 2, and this fabric piece 2 is big enough that I can see it. It's completely within that area.
Is the light board really useful, helpful, necessary?
No.
Okay.
No.
Not to start with.
Not to start with. You could totally use a window. I mean, honestly, when I'm doing it, most of the time I don't have, have I brought out the light board yet? No. Most of the time I just hold it up to my light. So I have a slimline light above my my sewing machine, and usually I just kind of hold it up to the light.
Got it.
So we have a light board, but I generally don't use it. So yeah. So then we're going to pin these two together. All right. So you can also place it this way in the pattern. It'll show you to do it this way and then to repin it here. If I'm using the light board, I can kind of do this. So, so we've gotten it so that the fabric is covering this whole area. I've pinned the two together. A lot of people say that you can just pinch it. I will say until you really understand how it works, it's a really good idea to just give it a little pin and then make sure that you pin it away from the line, because you don't want to stitch over that pin at all. You can take it out while you get going, but this will help you get to the machine so that nothing gets moved at all while you're sewing it. All right, are we ready to go over and sew?
Yes. Can we talk about right sides of fabric versus wrong sides of fabric?
Yes.
Please.
Okay.
Because this spun my head out too when I did my tests.
Okay, so the way that we're piecing everything, and darn it, oh, here. Okay, I'm going to bring out my bigger piece. Okay, this is the piece we have to fix later that I'll show you. Okay, but everything gets pieced. So here's this craziness. Everything gets pieced to this side, but when you turn it over, it needs to be right side out. So the paper is the foundation behind it. So if you can remember that it's going to look like this in the end, that this will be on this is the front of it. The paper is the back to be the foundation. So I need to see this and I need to see this. So it should be pretty sides out on both sides. Okay. This is what we're going to talk about later, is that I put a pink where a blue should be. Oopsie. So that means that when I put my fabrics down to start with, my first one needs to be right side up this way. So it's wrong side to wrong side.
It's a little hard to tell right now because that's so transparent, and the light box made that look like basically the same from both sides. The only difference being that you can read the letters from one direction.
Okay, so what did I do?
But now it makes sense. Now I can read fat triangle, and it makes total sense.
Okay, because if it was like this, you wouldn't be able to see.
Right.
So I would put wrong side to wrong side. So here's the wrong side of the freezer paper to wrong side of the fabric.
Great.
Okay, so wrong to get started. Then when we're actually piecing these together, we want to put them right sides together to make our seams go where they're supposed to go. Okay, so again, I'm going to lay my fabric right side down, so wrong side up. I'm going to put my fabric on here. I'm going to fold this back, and then I'm going to tuck my fabric. This one is, it is a printed fabric, so I can kind of see those through there, but if I look at it here, I can see that this is the right side. So this is something that when we were doing it with Hawke, I gave him, did I give you solid fabrics? I gave you a batik
Right.
That's what it was, a batik. And they're kind of the same on both sides. So it was a little confusing as to which side needed to be out. And then I told them it didn't matter, but it really did. And yeah. So these are now right sides together. Okay. I'm going to make sure again that my fabric underneath is being covered completely. And then I'm going to flip this over. So now when I take this to the machine to sew, this is kind of what it looks like. All right. I'm going to sew right along this line. This is the part about paper piecing that is so great, is that I don't have to keep track of a 1/4 inch seam line, or make sure that my seam allowance is exactly the same. I just get to stitch on the line. So let's move over to the machine and I'll show you a couple of things that I do with this. So one thing is to use an open toe foot. So when you use an open toe foot, you can see what's going into your machine a lot better. It's much harder to see when I have my little foot on here. I'm going to see if I can move this. So if I have this foot on there, for instance, all I can see is just down that little pipe from the needle hole. And it's really hard to line up this line down that little pipe. Okay. So when I use this foot, it's a lot easier because I can actually see what's coming. Much, much easier. Okay. One of the other things that I found is that using my laser was just such a great thing. I was like, look, it goes all the way down. So I can really aim very nicely. So I can see, you probably can't tell quite as well because of the angle, but I can see that I was just slightly off the line at the top, which I want to start so that it will go straight down this line. I'm always going to sew straight lines.
I'm going to jump in here.
Yep.
Me, because I have so little experience with my machine or your machine. Mm-hmm. It took me some time to get my targeting right on where to start and stop. So I found myself hand cranking the needle down until I knew that I had hit exactly on the line. And then that gave me a good place to start. And then I could, pedal to the metal after that. But I sort of, hand cranking until I nailed the beginning of that line was really helpful.
Right.
And I did not use the laser, and I wish I had.
Yeah. I wish you had too. I wish I would have figured that out earlier.
It's awesome. If you have a laser, this is how you use it.
And it's funny because I've been sewing for so many years and there's still things that I'm like, oh, I could do that. So the laser was, great. I only figured that out a couple days ago. So like he said, he did it so that it starts right at the end of this line. These lines on here go past the seam allowance. So remember that this is the seam allowance for your block. You need to sew past that. One of the things that I found is that some patterns will tell you to do a lock stitch and some patterns do not. So really this is one of those things that is kind of up to you, but it depends on how much sewing. I'll show you in one of the other ones when it might come in handy. Generally, I don't backstitch. I just start at least 1/4 inch past where that intersection is going to be. The other thing that's really important is to lower my seam or my stitch length. So I don't think we put in a banner for this.
No, I'm doing it right now.
So I do it at 1.4 to 1.6. Sometimes you'll see 1.8 millimeters, and you can see them. You'll see different patterns doing it differently. And it really is more about your machine than what is called for in the pattern. I like 1.4 because it's just really tight. It is really tight. So if you have a machine that does like 1.5, that's totally fine. If it does 1.7, that's great. I wouldn't go above 1.8. So I'm just going to stitch right along this line, right through this paper. And I just kind of follow the line. So what I'm looking at as I sew is kind of about here and making sure that it's heading into the foot toward the needle where I want it to, which I really like this laser for that because I can kind of tell that it's going in the right direction. If you don't, you just kind of eyeball it.
To be clear, I didn't have a ton of problems following the line. No. Once I got the needle down in the right spot, it was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, totally. And I totally just backstitch because it's habit. Okay, so now we've gotten this sewn together. So at this point, I can come over here and I can kind of test this and I can pull this over. I'm just going to pull it over like this and I can see that it's going to cover this whole area. but I've got all of this junk behind here, so I need to get rid of that. So I'm going to flip that back over. I'm going to take it over to the cutting board just like this, and then we'll trim it up. All right, so this is where things can go a little bit sideways.
I don't know what you mean.
He feels called out. I will tell you, it's not you, it's everyone. All right, including me, when I was very careful and just hacked that baby off. So don't do that. Okay, that was not my trim line. Bad, bad, bad. I'll show you how to fix that in a minute. But first, what we want to do is we want to pull our pattern back, away, and then we want to trim our 1/4 inch seam allowance.
That add a 1/4 ruler is awesome because it just tucks right up along the paper edge, folded edge right there, and it won't let you make a mistake.
It makes it super easy to both see where the 1/4 inch is and to keep it there. So let me grab my other ruler here, just so I can show you what the difference is. So when I'm trying to do it here, there's just a lot of markings that I'm having to look at and then figure out which one am I actually trying to see. And then I can line it up here, and then I could trim it. But it takes me a lot longer to get that figured out than it does for me to just pop that baby on there. Okay, so this is really super good for that. So now...
Is that like a block lock ruler?
No, no. This is it's a CM Designs Inc.
Got it.
I don't know who they are, but they make a good product. It's been around for years and years. So now we're going to push this fabric over so that it will cover section 2. So I like to kind of give it a little bit of a tug, and then I just do a little bit of seam rolling. I will say I roll it from the main fabric over here toward this. What I have found is that when I do it this way, and maybe it's because I press too hard, I tend to stretch it and it starts to do a weird thing, and it will sometimes press the wrong way. So it'll press with a pucker basically in it. So I like to do it this way. Get that nice and flat. Okay. Then you can take this to the iron if you'd like. So if you've got like a little TV table, what do they call those little stands? TV tray stands. You can have your little travel iron and a little wool mat. So I've got these, and you can set these up just close by, have these nearby where you're going to actually do your little pressing over here. And I find that I like it better pressed with the iron, but sometimes what I will do is I will press all of it as I go with the seam roller, and then at the end I take it to the iron, and then I give it a good press before I trim it. All right, so we've gotten this part done. Now we need to do the other side. So we're going to do the same thing where I'm going to press this over. So now you can see that this is caught, right? Because we sewed it down. This is where we just can kind of pull that away. And we want to pull the paper so that it tears the paper and not the stitches. So this is a great time to be able to check and see, are your stitches holding? Because they should just pull right out of the paper. Totally fine, and not pull out of your fabric. If it's pulling out of your fabric, they're not tight enough. So I would reduce your stitch length, and then I would just make sure and check your tension that it's actually nice and tight. Okay. So I'm going to put this on here, and I'm going to fold this back right along that line again. And like I said, this ruler is really nice because this edge, I think you can see it. Can you see that it like trims down?
That's a great angle. Yeah,
okay,
it has a wide bevel on it.
Right, so it comes down, and then you can just line that right up along your paper and fold it over. So it works better than using this ruler that is a little wide, because that's what I was trying to use, and that was not working. But this works really well, and that's what they made it for. Okay, so now I've got that folded over. I know where my seam line needs to be. I can put it on here, make sure I've got right sides together. Okay, make sure I'm going to catch everything. It's going to be underneath there. Okay, now grab a pin, stick my pin in there, and move it. So this is one thing. So when you start getting these, when we get over to the machine, you need to kind of do a double check and make sure that this is not gotten folded at all. Sometimes, I'm going to show you, let's move over to the machine. I'll show you what happens. So sometimes what happens is when you're putting this in here, this will get ticked underneath.
I don't know anything about that either.
No, neither of us know anything about
I tell you
accidentally
what,
sewing it down.
I did paper piecing exactly one evening, and I managed to make all of the mistakes all at once. It was great.
That's great. So when you're putting this in there, make sure that you kind of do a little bit of a double check and make sure everything is nice and flat. And I usually do that by just kind of pulling it up, making sure I can see everything. We're going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go ahead and start stitching there. I'll take my pin out so that by the time I'm up here, it's not going to distort my fabric anymore. I really just need that pin in there to get it to here and that I can start sewing it. We talked a little bit that I lay this down and I'll pin that first main fabric. You'll find in a lot of tutorials, people will use a sort of a glue of some sort, which is why I have the Odif glue. I generally don't use it, but I would rather pin it, but lots of people will use the glue. But pinning it to get it over here is important. Okay.
I also found that when I pinned it from the front side, or the, I guess really kind of the back side, and then I, sorry, we want to switch back over to camera 2. There we go. Got it. I wanted to repin it from the face up side so that I knew I wasn't going to drive over my pin. So, I transferred the pin from the back side to the front side, or actually I'd used a second pin.
Because you pinned it this way and then flipped it over, repinned it, and then took this pin out.
That's correct.
Yeah. And that's a very easy way of keeping everything where you want it to be. Because I feel like that's one of the things that can happen that is super frustrating. Because honestly, as much as people talk about they don't want to take stitches out of Cuddle, I will say that taking stitches out of paper piecing is worse in my opinion. So we really want to avoid doing that. So now we've got it back over here. We can do that check again where I'm going to bring this over. And I'd be like, all right, good. It totally works. Push that back away so that it's back where I sewed it. Okay, so just do a brief little check. Don't keep it over there because that's where you get messed up and then you cut it off, i.e. this one. Okay, so now I've got that on here. Plop my little ruler back down again. Catch the edge. And then cut that off. Okay, so you can see there's a decent amount of waste with this one, and it's because I cut them big so that you have the freedom to not have it perfect. And I had asked Hawke while he was testing it out, would it be better to have it so that you didn't have as much waste or that you have more freedom? And he agreed that more freedom was a little bit better for this situation.
Especially at the beginning, because I couldn't tell where it was supposed to land as easily. I feel like there's an experience level there, and probably the more experience you get with paper piecing, the more you can see into the future. And the more fussy you can be about your initial cuts, and then not waste as much fabric. But
exactly,
I mean,
exactly. And we'll talk about that, about how to waste less fabric.
You gave me plenty of rope.
Yes, I try. I really do. So now we've gotten our block to this point. So this is all pressed. If I were doing this for myself, I would give this a little spritz of, I use the Magic, I even have it over here today. This is what I use. The Magic Quilting and Crafting Spray. I really like it because it is fragrance and flake free, so it doesn't flake up. I spray it on there. I let it sit for a second, let it soak into the fabric, give it a good little press, make sure that these are all pressed out nice and flat. I find that works really well. In intricate foundation paper piecing, I tend to starch my fabric before I start, and then I keep pressing it as I go. This one is easy enough to just starch it at the end, or starch alternative, whatever you like. Okay, now I'm going to take my regular ruler and I'm just going to trim off those sides. And I can kind of do a double check at this point, and this is what I do on the other one that I'm having to add the 1/4 inch, is I run it along here. My 1/4 inch is right on that stitching line. So I'm going to trim it here. And I'm just going to line that up. You will find that sometimes when a bunch of seams come together, your ruler will run a rock. So I just kind of hold it on both sides of that little lump to keep it flat. Just line that up again. And this makes trimming to 3 inches or 3.5 inches very precise. It makes your points very precise. And this is how all of your blocks end up exactly the same. All right. So there we go. Then we would just take our paper off. I like to leave them on there until I start actually piecing them together. And oftentimes I will piece these all, even with the Mirth, I'll piece them all together with the paper still on them, then pull out the papers. So let's talk about this one that I goofed up. Okay. So this one, it was on here. I'd pressed it over. We were at that last step. And instead of trimming it along this line, I trimmed it along this line for some reason. Can't tell you what happened. Brain did a thing and then I cut it off. Okay, so this clearly is not going to work. And I will say in all of the classes, and honestly, look at this isn't even going to work because it's so little right there. We're going to leave it this time, but this would be one that I'm like, I'm just starting over. But I'm going to show you how to fix this first. Okay, this was the first one I sewed on because I could see it's underneath there. So not only do I have to take this out, but I have to take some of this out so that I can get this fabric out. All right, so the first thing I want to do is take out these stitches so I can get it out. And this is when I kind of just pull back the fabric and try to get that blade to pop. And I'm gonna, oh my goodness, that's my last one in there. Let's see if this one's sharper, and if not, I'll pop a new one. There we go. Okay. So if I just kind of run the blade along there and don't push too hard, that's really the key, is it'll just pop the stitches. I just kind of let the sharpness of the blade do its work, which is why I would change out the blade if it wasn't continue not to work. Okay. Then I'm going to do the same thing. So this is one where you might want to kind of pin this back so it stays out of my way. And then I'm just going to pop some stitches in here. Keep my fingers out of the way. Because
I'm not nervous. You're nervous.
I can't possibly get a seam ripper in there. That's the problem. So I will say that sometimes, yes, I have cut holes in fabric, but I've also done that with regular seam rippers too. So while this seems slightly scary, it's actually not too bad. Okay, so I'm just kind of holding the pressure so that it's tight right there, which makes the stitches kind of pop up a little bit, and then I can just run that blade against them and they come right out. All right, so not bad at all. Now, I have the issue of this one, for instance, that I have completely cut off the pattern. So now, oops, I forgot to grab it. There's Scotch tape over by you. There was. There it is. Great. So this is where we can just tape our pattern back together. And go ahead and line that up as well as I can. Line that there. Okay. Ta-da, it's like new. No one will ever know, especially because I'm going to throw this away in the end. Well, except that I'm recording it live, but okay.
Thank you for showing us how to fix this.
You're very welcome. So, oops. Again, I'm going to keep that pin out of the way. I took it out and I didn't mean to. So now I'm going to take a piece of fabric, and this is how we can do it in other patterns as well, is that now I know where my 1/4 inch is, and I could actually line it up pretty easily at that edge. Let me do it this way so you can see it better. There we go. So now I could line my fabric up so that I will have a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, and this will flip over that direction. Okay. Does that sort of make sense?
Yes, because you already trimmed that. You know exactly where it needs to go.
I know exactly where my seam allowance is.
Got it.
So I'm just lining them up. We'll do that whole process again on the next one. I'll show you how to do it from the beginning. Okay. All right. So now this part is flailing over here, and I don't really care too much because this is just really where I'm going to trim this. I'm going to trim up the block to this size. So I'm going to stitch right over where I stitched before. This one is, this is that foundation paper sheets or whatever they called it. And sorry, I should figure out what the real name is. Foundation paper sheets, I think is what they are. But you can see that this is still really strong right there. It's not tearing at all. So that is one real good perk about this stuff, is that it is nice and strong and can be restitched. So again, I'm gonna take that. You can see this pin over here. This is where I've tucked away that other piece of fabric, so that I'm gonna have to re-sew after this, so that they're still sewn in the same order. On this block, not as important. On most paper piecing patterns, 90% of paper piecing patterns, it will be very important. Oh, look, set a piece of paper to it. Okay, so then this is going to come over here. That was our first one that we sewed, right? So it's actually the third one I've sewn, but it's the first one. Now I'm going to pull this back over, and I'm going to re-sew right there, just to fix what we did. All right, now I can go ahead and do this again. I can cut out my block. It's going to be totally fine. All right, this is where you'll get some little blips of thread in there. You'll just have to clean those out a little bit. They're not too bad, and you can see I didn't backstitch it all, but I overstitched it by about 1/2 inch, and I just tried really hard to make sure that I was kind of stitching right on top of the other line, so that there's no weird jog in the seam, which is important. Okay. All right. So there's that. Let me show you how to do one a little bit differently. So I am just going to make up stuff on this one and use some fabrics that I have, and it's going to come together really funky, but I wanted to show you how I kind of deal with these. When you are making something like even the Mirth blocks, or something like this one here, this is a letter T from Sam's book, I could go ahead and I could cut out pieces of fabric that were at least 1/4 inch bigger than this. So if I can put my ruler on here and find a place that I might be able to cut this at, say, what is that? 1.5? No, 2. Yeah, it's one of those funky rulers that confuses me because it has the extra 1/2 inch on there. Yeah, there's 1, 2.5. Okay, sorry, I have to look at it. So there's 1, 2. So if I do, there's my 1/4 inch, and I need at least 1/4 inch past there. If I cut it at 1.5, it'll be okay, and I should be able to fit that on there totally fine. Because this is a rectangle, this is really easy to cut out a piece that's a little bit bigger and make it work, which is how you avoid, having scraps. In this situation, I could cut out a triangle that was, 1/2 inch bigger on either side, make it work. You can do this pretty easily by looking at your paper over the light. If your paper, oh, this one doesn't show through. But you can also put it on here, trace around it, make sure the size. Okay, I like doing it this way, where I measure with a ruler. It's obviously not my favorite to do it over a light board. This is the way I do it. I measure them out, then I could sew these pieces on. When you have something like this gets a lot funkier, and I don't have any idea what shapes to cut out to make this work, nor do I want to measure all of these tiny little pieces and try to figure it out. So what I generally do is that I will cut down a piece of my fabric. So I'm working with 1/2 yard cuts of all of the fabrics that I had, because I'd gotten a bundle of that. And then I cut down chunks out of it. So I will cut like basically a 5 inch square, a 10 inch square. I will cut chunks like this and then work from there. So then I will chunk down these until I need to cut out a new big chunk. So for instance, we're just going to piece this together with some fabrics that I have. I'm not going to use that one because I wanted to use that for a different one. Oh, I have a little scrap here. So this is where these come in handy too. So we're going to do just a couple of these. All right, and see how it works. So I need to cover all of this. This is where the translucent stuff, the vellum, the What else did we have that was translucent? The foundation paper. And I feel like there was something else now. I can't remember. What else was translucent? Can't remember. Somebody tell me what it was. Because my pile is gone now.
Sorry, I'm not helping.
I can't remember. There was something else. Anyway, if you're using vellum or the transparent quilting paper or foundation paper, this is the part that I'm trying to cover right now. Okay, so I want to make sure that I have at least a 1/2 inch on all the sides. I can do this pretty easily by laying this out. I can see through it. It's very helpful. And then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to cut right along here. Come on. This is my
Those are your paper
ones. They don't cut as nice.
Paper rotary cutter. Yep.
This is how they ended up over in the paper thing, is because they don't cut fabric very well. So, all right. So, repin that. Okay, and now, so that's going to cover that whole area. Now I need to cover that little section too. I know this is going to work, but the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull this up, pull that back. And this is how this works a lot easier on, especially on bigger ones, is now I'm going to go ahead and trim that off. So now I know where my edge is, and now I need to put another one on there. Again, I need to make sure it covers that whole area. So if I put this on here, that's going to totally work.
And then you're
I can
in
put
the back,
these right sides together.
Sides together. Got it.
Come on, little guy.
Is everybody playing along at home? I know it. Sometimes I am, and sometimes I'm not.
Yeah, totally fine. Okay, so again, here's the space that I'm trying to cover. So right here, this is the space that I'm putting that red is going to go into. And when I have it here, I know I'm going to stitch along here, and that red is covering totally. I've got plenty of red around here. Okay, so it's going to be big enough for this. And then I've just lined it up. I had a straight edge there, so I just lined it right up with the seam allowance that I cut from this first fabric. Does that make sense? Okay, so I got the first cut piece, made a seam allowance, matched the seam allowance, and now I'm going to sew that on. Okay, so again, I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to put a little pin in it. Okay, I could stick my pin in it. I can do a double check, make sure nothing shifted too much while I was doing that. And then I can come over here and I will sew it. And I'm going to start. I know that this is the edge of my block. My seam allowance is a little bit bigger than this because if you remember, this is the one I shrunk. So I'm going to start past that dotted line a little bit.
Your hand's in the way. Just
oh, so sorry.
There we go.
Sorry, let me do that again.
Yep.
I wasn't
new
I wasn't
camera
looking,
angle for us.
Right. And I'm just, yeah, I think that you're, here with me in my head.
Yeah.
So
well, that and I used to be able to move the camera around.
True.
And we're not doing that.
So right here is my outer seam line that I know is not quite right. My seam line is actually going to be out here. That's where that little line is. That's my 1/4 inch. This is where my block's going to end. So I need to start stitching back here. And then I'm going to stitch past it about 1/4 inch. Okay. So this is one, because this is a tiny block, this is one that generally I will kind of stitch. Oops, we got caught with the pin. I'm going to stitch past it just a couple of stitches. I'm going to do a little lock stitch. And then I'll go just a little bit further. And the reason I kind of go a little bit further is it just keeps the seam allowance more even for me, so it doesn't curl up when I put the next one on.
And you lock stitched that time too.
I do, because this is a tiny one and it's going to get more pressure as I'm doing things.
Okay.
So all of those seams are going to get pulled. So on these little guys, I do tend to lock it on either side, because this, like this one, for instance, this seam here, I'm going to put it on the line so that it goes from here to here. It's just a tiny little stitching line. So it's much more likely to kind of come loose as I'm doing stuff because there's not a lot holding it down.
Yeah, there's like 8 stitches in there.
Right.
Or something.
So
that makes
I will
sense.
do a lock stitch on either end of that just to make sure they stay, but then I stitch past that the 1/4 inch. All right. So now we'll do just the same thing that we did before, but our seam allowance is already trimmed. So we don't have to do any cutting here. We just have to push this up and do a little bit of pressing. Okay, so at this point, I've got, you know, this big hunk of stuff hanging up here. I'm gonna grab my scissors because I know that the furthest it's gonna go up is here. So it needs to go a ½ inch or so above, but I'm just gonna take that big chunk off. Okay, so now it's covering plenty for that red is there. I can see that, which is really, this is the part that I love about this. And I think it can prevent a lot of mistakes too, because on mine, I write the color that it is, that it's supposed to be, and I can actually see what color that's supposed to be and be able to see the color behind it. So that's very helpful. So now we have LA3 that we're going to put on. I'm going to do the same thing. This one doesn't have, it's just a 5-inch square, so it's got that little pinking on it. I'm like, what is that word? Pinking. So I'm going to pull that off, clip it off, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to put this on here. So the first thing I want to do is, again, fold this back right along the line. Give it a good press. Now I can clip that or trim that to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now I know that that's going to work, so I can line that up with the edge of this. I'm going to turn this over this way so I can see a little better. Okay, so now those edges are even. There's my 1/4 inch, my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And here is the piece that I want to cover, right? So if I turn this over here, I can see that this back fabric is covering this whole section. Plenty, obviously. But I can sew this on here really easily, and then I'll trim that off. And that makes it super simple. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this over. This is one of those situations where you can see this keeps wanting to flip around, and then it plays with my seam allowance. So if I flip it over here, it's totally messed up my seam allowance. And I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of glue. Right there. Okay. Now it's going to stay where I want it to stay a lot better. And it's going to make working with it a whole lot easier. This is important on big pieces. So sometimes what I do is I stick a pin in here and leave it. So like these are big, huge hunks. Once it gets sewn together, it's kind of fine to leave it. But when you're working with this piece by itself, this is a huge hunk of fabric. Another thing I will do sometimes is just tack it up here within the seam allowance and do some stitches. Okay, so you could pin it, glue it, or do some tacking stitches. The glue works really well on this one. Whoops, I picked it up before I pinned it. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that again. And take it over the machine. All right, just getting a collection of pins over here. So now,
oh, sorry, my bad. There we go.
That's okay. Thanks for catching up. So now
I was with everybody else watching the Odif glue stick cap roll around. I got fascinated by a second.
Sorry, and now I've lost the stiletto again. I don't know how this happens. There's one. Thank goodness I have like 12. So yeah. Okay. So now, again, we have this line that I'm stitching. You can see that, right? Yep. So from here to here is what I'm sewing. You can see I have a little hole right here where it's stitched and it's ripped through already, and that's totally fine. Okay. So if I'm off just a little, I just kind of move this over until I'm in the right place outside of that stitching line. We don't want to be too far off, but a little is fine. We can correct that. And then I'm just going to stitch right down this whole line. I have found, so my machine is at half speed, and I have found that this is best for me because I like to sew fast. But sewing fast is not necessarily the best idea on this. Okay. I'm going to clip this. I want to sew one more so I can show you guys something. Okay, so we're back over here. Great. Okay, so now I can press this over. I can see, yes, it's going to cover that whole area. Awesome. Okay, then I can just kind of whack this off where I know it's going to be plenty big enough. And later I'm going to have more that'll get clipped off down here. And that's totally fine. I might be able to use this hunk for something else in the project. Hawke was watching me doing the snake one over the last week or week and a half or so, and I have just a growing pile of pieces like that. But then when there's a tiny piece like this, I can totally go back in there and find something that's going to cover this teeny tiny little piece. So while it seems like there's scrap, you can absolutely reuse that scrap in lots of ways as you're doing this. And especially if you're doing a larger one, you're usually dealing with, you know, maybe 10 or 12 fabrics. And then, you know, you can use all those scraps. Okay, so then I'm at this point. So I'm going to actually re-sew the green one on because I want to show you guys something. So we're going to walk through all of these steps one more time here. Okay, so press that over. I'm going to trim the seam allowance. We're going to make sure we've got a straight edge on here, straight enough. Yep. Okay, this is the piece I'm trying to cover, number 4. So I can see that my green is obviously just fine. If I want to pull this up so that this seam, when it ends, it's a little closer. I don't have quite so much waste up at the top there. Totally good. Do this. I'm going to give it a little pinch. And then we're going to sew from 3 to 4. So in this one, I'm having to start in the middle of a block and not out past the seam allowance. So I have to start in here. So this is where I'm going to put my needle down. I'm going to stitch a little bit. And then as I get closer there, I'm going to do a little lock stitch. And then I'll stitch past this. One of the things that I wanted to show you is that by stitching a little bit slower, if there's a little bit of a goof, or one, stitching slower, if there's a little bit of a goof, you can catch yourself faster. The other thing is with the stitch length. Because the stitch length is so short, if I goof and I go off just a little bit, I can correct it really fast. I'm going to show you this because if we're doing this at a bigger stitch length and I goof and I go off and I come right back, you're going to see the difference. Can you see that there? Okay, so this is where I goofed up with my 1.4 stitch length, and this is where I goofed up with my 2.0 stitch length. Because it's taking such bigger stitches, it takes it longer to get off and back on. Okay, so I have the same basically amount of stitches right here in this little goof, but it takes up much less area and won't be visible, whereas this one will, you can see it's causing it to be a little bit cockeyed right there. Okay, does that make sense? Can you kind of see that?
Yes. Oh, I could actually totally see what you were talking about, and my eyes rolled up in the back of my head about how particular that is.
Yeah, well,
I understand the importance of it. I totally do.
On something like the little squares or the economy block template that I gave you, it's no big deal. What happens here is that you can't get this to actually lay flat because it's a little cockeyed, and so you'll end up with a pucker here. And so when you press this, you see you have too much bulk in there. So what you do when you stitch your next one on is that you have a little pocket of fabric.
Got it.
That's what happens. So while it seems like it's a little finicky, all of these have to be straight so that you don't have pockets, because that's what will happen is you'll get loose in here. And then when you tear all your paper off, you just have a little loose square or loose, chunk, which is not great. Okay. So where are we with questions?
I think we are actually in pretty good shape with questions right now.
Have I intimidated everyone?
I don't think so.
Okay.
One note from LCSD was that she likes washi tape a little better than Scotch tape. And
yep.
We certainly have plenty of washi tape.
I got lots of washi tape too. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I have some from one of my favorite, I don't know, quilt artists, I guess, and he does wood quilts, and it's built quilt, and he does washi tape, and I really love it. Okay, so here, this is the example that we just did, and what I wanted to talk about just a little bit is how it plays differently with a print that reads as a solid, a print that is lots of colors, and a print that is a solid. Well, I mean, it's not exactly a solid. It's also a print that reads as a solid because it's got a little texture printed on it. Okay. They play very differently. And depending on what you want, this becomes definitely the focal point. So it's a little bit, you just need to be careful with prints like this. If you're mixing things, make sure that you're choosing your fabrics carefully. I really like to use things that are prints that read as solids. My whole one is being made out of the, I'm not sure what the collection is. It's from Adida Sitar from Laundry Basket Quilts, and it all looks a little linen-y, and I really like that. But when you use very vibrant prints in it, they will kind of yell out. Okay. The other thing is that you want to make sure that you are not using things that are too, this one, they're like too close to each other, that it all just reads as kind of a cream and not the blue. And then this one is a little hard to handle. So if I were doing this, for example, with this letter T, if I were to put in these as here, this gets really wild. Like that's kind of hard to read that as a T at all because it's so crazy. If I put this up here, you might be able to see it just a tiny bit better. Okay. So that gets harder to read because these are all very a lot.
What paper are you using again? Is that the vellum?
This is the vellum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I use this one underneath here, this one is a little bit tamer because it's what's the back of the solid-ish fabric. Okay, so it makes this T stand out a little more. This one, they just compete for your attention. So if my thing were made out of this for the T and this for the outside, it would kind of lose all ability to read it. So especially when you're doing text, that's super important. So actually, I have a sample that I forgot to pull out. I'm going to grab it really fast. That's kind of funny. I'm getting in my closet of works in progress.
She ran off, guys.
I did. Because I have it in here. Oh,
Alphabets.
Please let me find it.
Alphabets are kind of a great use of foundation paper piecing. I hadn't really thought about, but I know a lot of folks like to do typography on their quilts, and this is a great way to make that legible. So no.
Yeah, so I can't find it. I thought it was right at the top. So I made okay, so we can switch to the front. So I made a quilt using one of Hunter's Design Studio patterns. It's one that's in the little slideshow I'll show you in a minute. But I did that one, and I used a bunch of different batiks and purple batiks, and the background of it was a light purple. And then I used like varying shades of purple as it went, and I got too light. And so the last two words of it, I didn't realize till after I'd pieced it that you really couldn't even read them. Which was super frustrating to have gone through all of that work and then been like, oh. So it's really important to make sure you're kind of really thinking about how it's going to show up, and that whole value that we've been talking a lot about is really important in that sort of stuff, because it does become kind of a waste. There are lots and lots of patterns, though, that we can do with this. I do want to show you, before we do a little slideshow of patterns, now that you understand kind of how they work a little bit more, hopefully, I want to I want to show you how to fix it when you stitch one in that is in the middle of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to bring out this guy. And so again, this is the piece that I messed up. I didn't realize it until I got to this point. And this is just one of many, many, many sections of this quilt, which hopefully will become a quilt coat for QuiltCon. I'm really excited about this. But I piece them together as I go so that I can sort of start to see something, because as individual hunks, it's really hard to tell where it's going. When this was just the piece, I didn't even think about this maybe not being the right color. It just was. It in fact isn't. And I believe, yeah, this one is when I hadn't started writing the names on there. So you saw, oh shoot, you saw on that little, this is what I do. Okay, this one here, I wrote the names on there. I wrote dark blue, medium blue. I started doing that. Here's one that I did because I was piecing them together and it was hard to remember which one was which. And this is one in particular that she uses different like little bugs. And so it was hard for me to remember which bug was which. And I remembered wrong. So we're going to go ahead and take this guy out. So the first thing I have to do is separate it from the ones that are next to it. So I kind of just run my blade. I kind of pull it apart just a little bit and run my blade there to start kind of tacked stitches. I'm going to pull this out because it should do it easier than that. Okay, let's remember we got to put that in the sharps. There we go. So then I don't even have to hardly push it because it will just break the threads. If I have to push it all, that's when I worry about actually cutting the fabric, which I don't want to do. Because once we cut the fabric, then it's more work. Okay. So I'm just going to take this up a bit past where I stitched it. So I'm not taking the whole thing out. I am not that much of a glutton for punishment. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stick a little clip there to hold that back so it'll stay out of my way. One of the things too is with this quilt, this one here that I've been making, I've been using gray thread, printer paper, and but sometimes my threads show and I'm really unhappy with that. So I do feel like there is a point to using thread that more closely matches the color at certain points. And this might have been that point, is that some of these, it would have been helpful. Okay. So I'm going to push that back.
Virginia has a ton of really interesting and useful comments right now. She said sometimes because you can obviously you don't have to run these patterns through the printer, you can just trace them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Especially if the paper you're using is see-through. So she actually uses old patterns.
Yep.
As her paper
that's
piecing.
A great way of doing that. Yep.
It's like basically like tissue paper, right?
Yep.
And then at some point, were we going to do the freezer paper version?
No, we're going to do that as a separate tutorial.
Okay.
That'll come up probably next week.
Yeah, we will film another tutorial on how to use the freezer paper in particular. And because that is, you're not sewing through the freezer paper, you're folding it back and sewing right next to it. It's a slightly different process.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay. So I'm just taking these
apart. Thanks, Virginia.
Yeah, thank you. I really love, hearing from people. So this reminds me that on the little show notes that I did, I put a group on there that I'm part of on Facebook that is called Foundation Paper Piecing, I think is what it is. The link is on there. It's a bunch of numbers. It is a great group in that there's a bunch of stuff that goes on there that people have some really crazy stuff. And we'll show some of them that I found on there, patterns that I found on there.
Is it a Facebook group?
It's a Facebook group. Sorry.
It.
Okay. So there are two things with this that we have to talk about. Is one, I messed up piece number 2. Okay. So if I wanted to redo the order of operations, I literally would have to just take it all out and then start over. That's not the way I roll. So we're not doing that. We're going to do it a little bit opposite. And then this is my piece that is wrong. So I can come here. Let me see if I have a sharper little one. And I'm going to cut this piece out in this shape. Okay, so now I know that this is the size of the piece. I don't want to get that messed up. That I need. That little gold piece that I moved to the side is the piece that goes on the very tip. Sorry, I'm clear at the bottom of the screen. Okay. All right, so now I've got my replacement blue piece. So You'll notice I did them right side up, right side up. So I put them together so that they would both be the same right side up again, because that can be an error. Okay, I've got my little piece that goes at the end. What I'm going to do is I'm going to unfold this and now stitch it on the other direction. Okay, so I just decided to change the seam allowance is what I did, or seam direction is what I did. So I think that this goes this way. Yep, that's the way it goes. Okay, so now I'm going to take this back over. Make sure that's nice and lined up. Oh, come on, little guy. Yeah, I never said it was going to be easy, right? Yeah, taking them out is really my least favorite, but it's so much better than just giving up.
So no pins. You're just
no, because there's really no place to pin without stabbing myself.
And no glue stick, nothing right now.
Nope, we're just gonna do it and hope it works out.
Yep.
Because while I did cut it to the right size, I might not get it folded exactly perfectly. Okay. Oh yeah, pretty good. All right, good, good. Okay, so now, you see okay here?
Yes.
Here? Okay. So now I can see that that is going past there. All right, I am going to put this pin here while I go grab the other piece, because I know that that's now tight where I want it to be. And then I have this piece that's going to get sewn on this direction, it looks like. It goes this way. No, that's not quite right. Okay, so it needs to go on. Oh, that's down. Got it. Okay, so now if I fold it like this, yep. Did that make sense? Could you kind of see what I was doing?
You could absolutely see what you were doing. And I'm going to make the assumption that if you have gotten to this place in this particular pattern, you're going to understand what she's doing better than I do.
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm really just reworking the whole thing that I did there. And the biggest thing with this one is that oops, I sewed it from the wrong side. That's hilarious. I sewed it along the seam line. Let's see how I did. Yeah. Look at that. I just sewed it on the seam that the fabric was. That's what I was watching, was where it had been sewn before. Turns out that was actually the right line. So that's great. Okay, let's go back over here. Sometimes I get so caught up in what I'm doing. All right, move me. Move me.
There we go.
I'm over here.
Yep.
Okay, so now this is the piece that I just fixed. So the biggest thing is that I changed the order of operations. I didn't get this sewn on perfectly. I can see that my seam allowance is too big here, but it's still big enough here that it's going to be fine. Okay, I'm going to get that pressed. Just finger press it real good. I'm going to go back. I'm going to sew these back in position. Do a little pin. A lot of times in patterns, they'll tell you not to use pins, and I will use pins where places I need them to match really carefully, but then I try to take them out before I get there. And this is situations where the stiletto will come in really handy, because I'm going to have to take this pin out and then hold them together really well. Okay, so let's do that. All right, so again, I'm going to come back up past where I took the stitches out. I'm going to get my needle down there. Okay. And then I'm just going to sew right along the edge of this paper to get that seam allowance back where it was. And then I am going to back stitch here. There's your little lock stitch, because this is a seam that's going to get some more stress as I piece other things to it. All right. So there's that one. Now I can sew this one back on. I'm going to do the same thing. Now I'm going to put it back. And now these two down here, These seam allowances are wonky because this one here and this one here, because I had repieced, right? So they're not quite in the right place anymore. They're close enough that what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it here and I'm going to make sure that it just lays flat. This is the 1/4 inch here. I can see this is an 1/8 of an inch or something. So this is going to lay out there. I'm going to stick a little pin in there just to make sure it stays. I'll come back over here and sew right along this edge. So you can see it gets crazy bulky in here. And it's really why I suggest starting with small ones first, because these can be very intimidating. Okay, I'm going to go forward just a little bit. I'm going to do a lock stitch. I'm going to cut my thread.
The 2 blocks in the Mirth pattern are way easier.
Way easier. Yes, exactly. That's why we started there. That's why we started there. So you can see here's my block that I replaced without the pink in there anymore. It looks much more like it's supposed to look, and I'm really happy with that. So that's how you can go ahead and fix things. It's a little bit of a pain, but the other, option was coloring it in with Sharpie, and that wasn't going to happen. So.
That's not right. You sound like a painter.
All right.
Okay. Question back to
Let's
front.
Bring it up front first.
You got it. Do you recommend using a single hole seam plate?
Yes, actually, if you have a single hole plate, it will work a little bit better. Not everybody has them, and they're not super easy to necessarily change out. If you have them, they're really good. I really love my featherweight for paper piecing because the foot is really narrow. It's a single hole plate. Like, it's super easy to use. It's great for that. And I feel like it's well lit and I can really see what's happening. Sometimes with the bigger machines, it's a little harder. I know I've seen a few of the tutorials that have said to use a walking foot. And as much as I'm a big fan of walking foot, the walking foot seemed like it was too visually big when I'm dealing with little seams. So I like the featherweight just because it is small like everything else. Does that kind of make sense? But the single needle plate, it is helpful if you have it. It's not necessary, but if you have it, it will make stitches a little nicer. Yeah.
This is a crazy question.
Okay.
It's not a crazy question. It's a very interesting question. Any thoughts on translating a paper piece to an embroidery machine pattern?
I'm sure that there is a way, but that is definitely not my forte. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I know people do piece embroidery stuff on piece quilt blocks on their embroidery machine. It's not really what I do. I think that Sheila Ryan from Designs by Baby Moon has done some of that. And I know that Parker on the Porch, who does embroidery stuff, she does quilt blocks. So they would probably be people to ask, or in their Facebook groups or something, to kind of look into that information, because I don't know.
Well, you do have an embroidery machine. It and paper piecing have not crossed paths.
No, they haven't. No,
got it.
They haven't. Okay, anything else?
No.
All right, so let's go through the slides. So now that you understand a little bit about paper piecing, I want to show you some of the designs that you can do with it and some of what's available. So it can definitely get really intense, but it also doesn't have to. All right, so pop them up. We started with my Mirth pattern. Now we're going to talk about Hunter's Design Studio. So this is the quilt that's on the left, the Do More of What Makes You Happy. That was the one. So yeah, when I got down, I think I did it this way. So it was actually, when I got to the top, the Do More on mine was, you couldn't read it. And so it was just, of what makes you happy, which didn't make any sense. So color value is a big thing. And you can see that on hers, what she did is she changed that last word to orange. So it's dark, but it's an orange and not a darker blue. So it's absolutely easy to see. She also has this great Bloom and 2 pattern. She has quite a few paper piece patterns. This one, we did a tutorial for it for Shannon Fabrics about 3 years ago when we were at Casey Maker, actually, and I showed how to make that. That one is a really fun one because behind us on the wall, you can see the Violet Craft wolf abstractions that I did in Cuddle, and that's pretty fun. That one is still at Casey Maker, so I don't have it to show you guys. But if you look for paper piecing in Cuddle, you'll find a whole tutorial of it using that Bloom and 2 pattern. And then she has the book called Quilt Talk that is all about, using those letters and creating different projects, including those little baskets, different quilts, all sorts of things. And hers are all really straightforward. You can see that they're not super complicated. They're really cute, and she has some really fun ideas for like placemats and stuff in that book. I like it. I've had it for years and years. It came out maybe 10 years ago or so. And you can buy autograph copies from her directly on her website. So, okay, next up. Pride and Joy Quilting, you've probably seen her stuff out and about. She does some really cool stuff. I just recently got this pattern on the right. It's the road trip. She does a whole bunch of ones. I think they're called Capturing Memories. And I think they're about 20 by 20, 27 by 27. They're small, like wall quilts, and they depict different places. So this is actually one quilt that looks like it has two Polaroids on it. So the other Polaroid behind it, you can't really, it's a square quilt, so you're not seeing the whole quilt, but it looks like there's two Polaroids on all of them, and it's not, it's just one quilt that has the two Polaroids. It's a very cool way that she did these, and she has them for Scotland and the Midwest and road trips, and she's got them for the beach. She's got them for all sorts of places now. I think there's about 20 of them. So those are really fun to check out. And this is the pattern on the left is one she's had for a while that was originally a woman in a red hat, and then she redid it for the recent Wicked release, which I thought was lovely. So you've got both characters there, which is fun. So hers are a little bit more complicated, but they're really good. And she does a lot of teaching, and you can take an online course from her on paper piecing. Okay. Violet Craft, I've mentioned her a few times. She does the seam roller that I was talking about, and she did the wolf abstractions that I've made several of hers. I've made the elephant and a few different ones. She's got some, the tiger, you can see is pretty complicated. The one on the left is also paper pieced and is not really complicated. She has several of them that are really easy paper piecing patterns, but we'll get those starbursts, which are harder to make, those, cosmic things in there. Those are hard to make without paper piecing to get them really perfect. So the paper piecing stabilizes that and makes those points just super sharp. So she really uses paper piecing to its full benefit in her range of patterns, and she has quite a few of them, and she's at violetcraft.com. Okay. Carolyn Friedlander, she does a lot of different quilt patterns, and she does some hand applique ones. I've done a bunch of those. I guess you could do the machine applique too, but I've done the hand applique. And then she's got a few paper piecing patterns as well, including this alphabet, which I think is really fun and kind of harkens back to her architectures print that I love so much. So her stuff is really good, simple, easy to follow the directions, and she's also got tutorials and workshops on her website too. So she's a great resource, and she has wonderful fabric. Tamara Kate is the designer that I was talking about with the big snake that I'm making, which I have the picture of somewhere. I'll have to show you. But she's got a whole series of different ones, and she's got the Wonder Garden ones. I think there's 8 in the series or something that are just these beautiful different animal prints and florals. I really, really love them, and I'm excited to work on this snake once more to get it done for the year of the snake, because that's what it is. All right. Then we have Pictures Boutique, who gets really very detailed stuff. She will also do custom paper piecing for you. So if you end up on that Facebook group with the foundation paper piecing, you'll see some that she's done custom quilts or quilt patterns, I guess, for people's pets, which are just amazing. So like you can see all of the different fabrics that are used on this Highland cow to get all of that different texture in the hair, which is lovely. I'm excited to make this National Park Service one because I really want to make a national park quilts because we have been to so many and I love them. You will also notice she has a lot of them that are free because they are using like different brands and stuff. So you'll find some, like if you see a Yoda one that you've seen around, she did one of those, and those are all free patterns because you can't sell them. So she's got a wide variety and they're really good. So, and then next we've got, you can see we're getting, a little bit more and more complex. Then we've got Legit Kits, who was recently on Shark Tank, and that was super fun to see quilting on Shark Tank. And they have just a wide variety. I think they have about 60 patterns now that are just a lot of different designs. So really just a ton of different styles, I guess is what it is. They're all put together. So the difference with Legit Kits is they are all constructed on 8.5 by 11 sheets. that are then sewn together that way. So a lot of the other patterns, we cut them down from the 8.5 by 11 sheet, and these are actually put together in 8.5 by 11 and then constructed that way. So they are a little bit different. There's another one, oh shoot, I'm going to try to remember. There's another pattern company that's based in Everyday Stitches, based in Kansas City, who does it that way on some of their patterns too, where they make, I think they use 4x6 blocks, which is a different way. Okay, and then we have two more. We have Quilt Works from Judy Niemeyer. The last one, Legit Kits, Quilt Works, and I think the next one all offer kits that you can get. The papers, they're already printed. You don't have to copy them because there's lots and lots of sheets. So their patterns are going to be much more expensive because they have the sheets ready to go for you. Quiltworks is one of those, and she has both Quiltworks and Legit Kits have certified instructors that can teach you their whole process of putting them together. They are very ornate and lots of detail in them. You can see most of hers are this sort of style with the feathers, the Mariner Compass things, the New York Beauties. Like, it's a lot of points, and hers, it's a huge variety. She's been designing for a long time. So quiltworks.com is her website, and like I said, there are instructors that teach that all over the country as well. And then the last one that we've got is Be Colorful with Jacqueline DeJong, who also does teaching, and I think she's got a couple of online workshops that you can take that she teaches this same really beautiful, lots of points, lots and lots of points. But hers tend to have a lot of vibrant colors in them, which are really beautiful. And she's got some smaller designs too, but she's got some really big, beautiful ones. And I know she teaches all over the country too. So if you can find her at an event or at a local quilt shop teaching classes, it's really worth taking it to hear what her take on it is. Did you have a question, Hawke?
Nope, I'm just going to switch into two.
Okay, got it. I saw an arm raised.
There is actually a question.
Okay.
Let me see if I can go back and find it.
All right.
Give me just a sec. It's where was it? Oh, it's a sewing machine question, actually.
Yeah.
Do you think this is suited for my Juki QVP? It's a quilting machine, but I've mostly made handbags with it.
I'm sure.
Yep.
I'm sure it would work.
If it makes a straight stitch,
yeah. If it makes a straight stitch, you're fine. Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, if I can do it on my featherweight, we can probably do it on pretty much any machine. It really doesn't take anything special. It's just being able to shrink your stitch down. So I have found that on very low end machines, they'll only be like 3 or 4 different stitch lengths that you can have. And so it'll be like a tiny one, a middle one, a big one, a basting one. Like, there's not very many stitches that you can click between. So you might have a little bit more of an issue making sure that it's small enough on that small one, because I'm not sure how big that is. But that's the only sewing machine issue I would see, is not being able to get your stitch small enough. That said, I think that those get pretty small. There are tons of other patterns. So those are just some of the pattern designers. There are a ton of pattern designers. You can find lots of the tiny piecing with the collaboration with Giuseppe and Juicy Juice and Allison Glass. They did a whole series of tiny piecing with paper piecing. There was a couple others that I can't remember. Thought about them earlier. I mentioned Everyday Stitches, Sassafras Lane. There's a lot of them that have some paper piecing. The patterns that I listed off there for you and that I included in the handout for today, those are ones that primarily work with paper piecing. So that's really their strength, and they have a very strong way of doing it, like a very consistent way of doing it, which I really like. I will say a couple of things about different patterns. So let me grab a couple of things really quick here that I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you one other thing too before we go, and then I'll let you get out of here. So when you get patterns, this is one from the desert version of Pride and Joys. So I got that one too.
Oh, the Polaroids.
The Polaroids. So that one is the desert and has a big cactus and the mesas. It's really beautiful. But they all print out like this. Oops, we get it to come. There we go. And then you end up having to tape sheets together. Okay, so then you tape one sheet to the next where it shows you to, so that you can get the length that you need. That's the way I had to do it for the snake that I'm doing as well.
Even though with the snake you're doing, you actually shrunk it by half.
I did, but the pieces
the
were,
pieces often
yes,
were still bigger than one whole sheet.
Right. So yeah, it definitely, it's printed out bigger. So I really like getting smaller PDFs. And if I have to buy a bigger one, if I want to make a bigger one, I like getting the printed sheets. This is the cute snake. We'll see if we can get that to show up that I'm doing. I don't think I've ever used the term cute snake before, but here it is. So this is the snake I'm doing for the Year of the Snake. And I'm excited about getting that one completed. I'm about maybe a third of the way done. So it's definitely taken a while. When you buy Violet Crafts patterns, they actually come like in a booklet sort of thing. And then she gives you the patterns that are all on 11 by 17 pages that you then can go and make copies of. And I would really highly suggest that if you buy a paper pattern, that's what you do, is you go make copies of it. She prints hers so they're back to back. So you can't just use them out of here, which I think is very smart. One, it saves paper to be able to print it for her. And then also it like lets you, forces you to go make copies of the pattern for yourself so that you can have the original later if you decided you wanted to do it again. So not using those patterns up, actually keeping them and keeping them in their folder. I've had this one for years and years since it first came out, 2018. So this is the Three Sisters in Eastern Oregon is this one. She has a lot of them that are, she has a Mount Hood one, which I left out there. I washed it and I left it out there. I'm not even sure where it's at right now. And then I wanted to show you this one. This is another one that I got that's Carolyn Friedlander. So she has some other ones. This is one of the first ones that she did, and I really love this one. I think it's super, super fun. I really love it. And they are all really simple little shapes. Okay, so super easy. This is a great beginner one too, and as long as you're not using directional fabric, you'll be fine. So that said, I want to show you just a brief thing about directional as well as fussy cutting. So could we go to the top one more time? Okay, so this is the block that you get. Yours will look a little bit different. This is the block that you get in the Make show notes today. It's an economy block or a square and a square, and it's super easy to do. The one that I gave you is labeled with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, when you put it together, I ask you to put the center one in and then opposites and opposites, and that just helps it not get twisted. Okay, so that's the reason for that. But one of the things about using something like this is that you can fussy cut it really well. So you can figure out exactly where you want things. So like this cat almost, or squirrel almost fits. Well, the cat fits. Okay, so I know that this is a 3-inch square. I could cut this roughly at 3.5, 4 inches, put that underneath there. Even when it's backward, if I'm using the translucent foundation paper and a light table or your window, you can see this through. And I could absolutely just pin this in place, pull this up, cut around it, and have this be absolutely fussy cut. The other thing that's kind of cool on this block that I would encourage you to do is to look for things like this bear. I really love the bear too. And he's big enough to fit in the center one or in the second one. So what I could do is cut this out a little bit bigger here and then just have the corners rather than this one starting here. I would just start with this big square. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't have to piece all of the lines.
No. And
sense.
this is a fun one. Okay, I'm gonna cough. Hold on. So this also allows you to do it so that if you want to cut out these pieces and you wanted, say, these little flowers in there, you could find flowers that would go the right side for each one and fussy cut those, knowing what your shape was. So when it's patterns like this that are a much more consistent, easy shape, like a square or a triangle, it's easier to cut these things out and then make them work, and then use the translucent aspect of it to be able to piece it really well. Okay, does that make sense? Is that helpful? Okay, I think I got through all the things that I wanted to get through. Whew, that was a lot, guys. I appreciate you though so much. So thanks for letting me share all about foundation paper piecing. I really do think it's just a really it's a really interesting way of being able to create things that are kind of impossible to create otherwise. Like that snake is never going to get made if I have to like cut out those teeny tiny pieces and sew them together. It's just not working. So I'm happy to be able to use that technique to be able to do different things. I will say, sorry, I will say that I tend to be like one who just like whacks things off and makes them as I go. But for me, the biggest thing are making sure that my seam allowances are even. They're nice in the back, because it will come into play later. Making sure that I have taken out all the little paper bits, which is why I kind of drove home about how easy they come out, because sometimes they'll be very hard to come out. And especially on some of these where they get really tiny in there, you really do end up getting the stiletto or the tweezers to pull those papers out. But you can make such amazing, amazing things with it that I have made a number of different quilts, including big, large ones. I've made the pillowcase cover that I forgot to bring in. I've made several of Hunter's Design Studio patterns, and I really do love what they can let you do with it. So there's just a lot of capability to make things that otherwise would be completely impossible. So even if you aren't going to do it, I would suggest that you go look at some of those pattern designers and see what they're making with it, because it is really just phenomenal. It's a whole other beast. So did we get giveaway stuff?
I'm working on it right now. Keep
good.
talking.
Okay, I'm going to take a little drink.
Please.
Okay, so we do have giveaways that we're going to do. So I have, let me grab them really quick here. So I have 2 of these that I'm going to give away that are 3 of them. Did I say 2 or 3?
2.
2.
Please.
That we're going to give away that are all the colors to make your own Mirth quilt. So the Mirth calls for 4 darks and 4 lights. And so that's what I have here. Let me see if I can get these fanned out for you a little bit so you can see them better. And these are 1/8 inch cuts of all of these, which are really pretty. So you have a dark and a light and a dark and a light. Of all of these are from Adida Sitar and Andover Fabrics. They are really lovely. These are the ones that I was telling you, like they have a little bit of a printing on them that looks kind of more like it's a linen, which I really like. Then it's not just the plain solid, but it still reads as a solid. So we're going to give away 2 bundles of this, as well as the pattern itself. We'll send you the hard copy of the pattern. Then you'll need to get the background fabric. I'd love to see what you do with it. I'm using that kind of creamy color with little flecks of other colors in it. And I'm excited to see how that looks. I've also seen it done with dark. I'd love to see somebody else do that one. And we'll see how it goes. So I think it'll be really cute. So we're going to give away 2 of those.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so we are ready. We've got winners.
Here we go.
We've got Stephanie Kreisman and Yvette Hartso will win the Mirth quilt. So if you are watching, please email us.
Yep. Right there on the screen, email hawke@crinkledreams.com. I need your mailing address and your daytime phone number for the shipping company, please, and thank you.
Yes, so we will get those out to you. If you get us your information, we'll be happy to send those to you, and you can make your own Mirth quilt. So thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here with you guys, and thanks so much for welcoming us back to doing lives. It's really fun. And next month we will be back. We're going to be talking about English paper piecing, which is completely different. And people often try to get them confused. And I'm going to clarify why they're so completely different. So we're going to talk about that next month. We will be back March. What is it? We're going to record it. That's right. We're going to record it. So it won't be live next month, but it'll come up on March 5th. Again. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
So I will be teaching in Missouri at that point in time. So I'll be teaching at Missouri Star Quilt Company. We're doing a quilt coat class there. I'm also doing a quilt coat class at Casey Maker the weekend before that. So March 1st and 2nd, I will be teaching at Casey Maker. We'll be doing the quilt coat and a pillow with the Cats in Pajamas pattern from Elizabeth Hartman. So if you're available to come to any of that, please do. I'll also be teaching the next weekend at So Hungry Hippie in Wisconsin. I had to do Madison, Wisconsin again in my head. So really looking forward to that. So we've got a lot of teaching ahead of us, but we will record one all about English paper piecing from Casey Maker and have that up live for you on March 5th. And then we'll be able to answer some questions and help you understand all about English paper piecing and how you can use that too. Okay, including how to sew it on machines. So that should be pretty fun.
Oh, that's
all right.
fun.
Okay, is that it?
That's it. We're done. Thanks,
all right.
everybody.
Thank you so much. And I wish you a very happy February and happy sewing.